Good evening, everyone. We're now in Daniel chapter 4. We left off yesterday at verse 19. I just want to bring our attention to the last phrase of Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar is Daniel, and he says, "My Lord, the dream, if only is applied to those who hate you, and its interpretation to your adversaries." Remember this word, my Lord, literally means Mari. Mari is the Aramaic for my Lord, which is equivalent to the Hebrew Adoni. You find this word used in a number of Assyrian church leaders, Mari, Emmanuel. And so these being Aramaic words, I just want to draw our attention to why this was actually described. Why did Daniel say these words? Because he was absolutely shocked. And if you recall, he is standing in front of Nebuchadnezzar, and he has to tell Nebuchadnezzar this shocking news. And it is not a good news. It is also a threat to Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar had dreamed and he saw his dream and it troubled him a lot. Now, Daniel is given the interpretation by God, and he himself is shocked by the meaning and understanding of the dream. And so we begin in verse 20 with the interpretation of the dream. Verse 20. Verse 20 begins this way. It says that the tree that you saw, meaning in his dream, which became large and grew strong, whose height reached the sky and was visible to all the earth, that would be the land of the kingdom, the Babylonian kingdom. And so it is, at least in the dream, if you remember what I said, that in the dream, it can reveal fantastic visions, not possible in real life, but in a dream, it is such a great and big tree that is so tall, whose height reached the sky. That is the contrast, the way that the the Babylonians and the Eastern people describe height. It's growing up so tall as if it's going to touch the sky. And it is so broad and so tall, it could be seen from the edges of the land of the kingdom. And that in itself is the original vision of the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. And it says whose foliage, by foliage, it would be the branches. The branches was very good to see the fruits abundant, lots of it, in which was food to nourish for everyone, under which the animals of the field live, and whose branches the birds of the sky settle for protection, for shade. And then verse 22 is the interpretation of this part of the dream. And he says this, it is you, O king, meaning this tree that was big is you. For you have become great and grown strong. And by this time, he has conquered practically everywhere in the known world. And your majesty has become great and reached to the sky. Now, this word, his majesty, in verse 22, really talks about his greatness. You can, the English word tends to call it majesty. It is about greatness. His greatness has reached the entire well, I guess, become great and reach the sky. And then your dominion to the end of the land. And this is a very poetic way of describing the greatness of Nebuchadnezzar, the greatness and his dominion. By dominion, it really means the sphere of his rule, the sphere of rule. And so Nebuchadnezzar is seen as great, mighty, probably the most mighty of all kings of the time. That is the tree, and God is depicting the message to Nebuchadnezzar. Earlier on would be the head of gold of the metallic image. Here, he's depicting Nebuchadnezzar as great, strong, big, majestic, and could be seen throughout his land that he had conquered. Verse 23. Now, verse 23 speaks about the watcher, which we have explained that to be angels, right? And in that the king saw, all visible in his dream, an angelic watcher, a holy one. These are just description of angels. So there is an angel that came down from above, from the skies, and he says this: chop down the tree, destroy it, but leave the stump with its roots in the ground. But with a band of iron and copper, not bronze, it'll be copper, put around it. In the new grass of the field, let him be drenched with the dew of the heaven, and let him share with the animals of the field until 7 periods of time pass over him. So now this picture here on this side of the screen is about the tree being chopped down, only leaving the stump, and a band of iron and copper surrounds the tree stump. And he says this is the understanding, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High. Remember, El Elyon in the Hebrew, which has come upon my Lord the King. My Lord is Mari, the King. Now, this is a very shocking interpretation. And when it is spoken to the king, it will shock him as well. That you, O king, will be driven away. Now, this idea of drive out literally means chased away. Chased away from humankind. Now, this word mankind, enosh, this is mortal mankind, right? Mortal mankind, which is all the people around him. And your dwelling place will be with the animals of the field. And you, O king, will be given grass to eat like cattle, be drenched with the dew of the sky. 7 periods of time will pass over you until you recognize that the Most High is ruler over the realm of all mortal. This word is mortal mankind. And it is God himself who will give whomever he wishes. Now, this idea of whomever he wishes is whoever God is pleased. Is pleased. It is not God's whims and fancies. God gives to whoever he is pleased with, that he inclines to those who does good in his sight. As God will give, he is giving based on his principles of reward. There is no way that God will arbitrarily give anyone. If the person is evil, God will deal with that person. It's only when God is pleased with that person that God will decide what to do. Now, 7 periods of time has passed. That would be 7 years. Now, continuing on in verse 26, this part is about the king going out, about him going to be in the fields with the like animals, like animals. And so he'll be on his fours and he'll be covered or drenched with the dew, right? And he'll be like an animal in the field eating grass. And in that, it was commanded to leave the stump with the roots of the tree. This refers to his kingdom will remain as yours after you recognize that it is heaven that rules. Now, this is interesting because this word heaven in the Hebrew is shamayim. That is in the Hebrew. In the Aramaic is uh, shamayim. Very similar sounding, right? Shamayim. One is a sh and one is a sha. Basically, this is the skies, or if you like, the heavens. And it's the heavens, the heaven rules, or heavens rule. Now, what does this mean? Remember, we never read the name of God in the book of Daniel. We read of the title of God, the Most High. And the Most High is the highest, the Ila'ah. Now, this is what it means here. This is the Ila'ah. Sounds like a little bit of Arabic. But here, I just want to draw your attention. No name of God is ever used in the book of Daniel. And in the presence of the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, we read of this new word that is referring to God. This is referring to God. Instead of using the name of God that the Hebrews and the Jews would know, they are pointing to above, that is the heavens or the skies, to direct their attention to God above. It is important for us to recognize that Nebuchadnezzar also identifies God this way. He understands that above him in the heavens is God above, the Most High God, the Ila'ah. And that after you recognize, now this word recognize means you acknowledge, right? You acknowledge, you know. This is about knowing, about acknowledging. It is a chance for Nebuchadnezzar to come to terms with God. Now, God is not going to teach him a lesson verbally. God is to teach him a lesson in his life. And it is for 7 periods of time. That would be 7 years of time. That is a long time for Nebuchadnezzar. And if you are conscious of the message here, you can imagine how Nebuchadnezzar actually feels. Daniel is talking about God, referring him to the Most High, the Ila'ah, referring him as heaven, Shemayim, pointing to the sky. This is the terminology you find in the first century Second Temple, uh, Judah or Judea, where the Jews talk about God by referring him as Shamayim, the skies. And that would be the carry forward from the exile period, that they are used to referring to God as Shamayim, as the skies, as the heavens. So by looking up, you seek God. And so Nebuchadnezzar has to understand that the stump is his kingdom. His kingdom is sealed. It is not given away, not just yet, because he needs to fulfill his time, and it needs to be 70 years before the decree to return back to Judea. The period of time that Nebuchadnezzar is reigning does not span 70 years, but it's in his reign where this 7-year period is taking him away from the palace, is taking him away from his throne. And according to traditions, his son ruled in his place with the title Evil Merodach. And so I just want to draw your attention that God is teaching Nebuchadnezzar all by himself out in the fields of the grass, where he is no longer behaving like a king. He is actually behaving like an animal of the field. Now, by the time we get to verse 27, we find Daniel tries to advise Nebuchadnezzar. Although the message and the understanding of God's communication to Nebuchadnezzar sounds very extreme, sounds very terrifying, that he is no longer going to be human, he's going to behave like an animal in the field, eat grass. So who is going to reign? His kingdom will still be there until he repents, until he recognizes and acknowledges that the heavens is the one that's ruling, that God above, Elah above, is the one that is going to rule. Nebuchadnezzar, powerful he may be, is not the greatest of all. In chapter 2, he already received his dream that he is only the head of gold. In chapter 3, he doesn't think that should be the case, so he made the image fully gold, indicating that his reign will be forever. But that is not to be. In his pompousness, in his pride and arrogance, and in his dealing with his people across the land, God is going to teach him a lesson that he cannot be brutal. He has to take care of the people. Why? Because people's lives, human lives, mortal mankind lives, they are precious in God's sight. The greatest of all kings at this time, Nebuchadnezzar, has displeased God. And if he continues to displease God, God will bestow his kingdom to whoever he is pleased with. And that means his kingdom will come to an end. And so in this case, the vision that was given to him, the dream says that when you recognize God in heaven, when you recognize Elah in heaven, when you recognize that heaven rules over you, then you will return the kingdom to you. And Daniel gives an advice to Nebuchadnezzar. Therefore, now, therefore literally means because of this. Because of this, O king, may my advise. Now, this is a very interesting word. The word here is malak, and the word king is malka. It all comes from the same root. May my advice that is going to give to the king be pleasing to you. The word here, to please you, means to be acceptable. The word be acceptable means the king will listen and the king can stomach it, can accept it, can be pleased with it. And so that is what this means. Because the advice that is given to the king is not a shocker, but it is from a sage, from one of his advisors, the chief of his sages, the chief of the wise men, the one that came from Judea. He is an exile, he is a Jew, and yet it is the Jew that is going to advise Nebuchadnezzar. And so Daniel says this: you must wipe away your sin by doing righteousness and your wrongdoings by showing mercy to the poor. And it says here, in case there may be a prolonging of your prosperity. And herein we need to explain these words. We have an A and a B, meaning the first part here and the second part here talks about the same thing. Now we have to understand what is being said. Number one, it says that you can remove your sin. This word wipe away literally means to break away, to discontinue, to break off your sin. And by sin, this is your sin against God, your offense against God that He's teaching you by 7 years to make you an animal. And you can do this by doing right. Now, this is tzedakah. This will be a common word, would be charity. It is not a theological word. This word is tzedakah or tzedakah in the Hebrew, and in the Aramaic, it's sitka, right? Sitka. Same root. It means the same thing, really. It's doing right by God. And doing right by God is charity. It's treating human lives well. And it is about mortal life. And God is punishing Nebuchadnezzar because of his ill treatment towards the people. And so righteousness is charity. It is sitka or tzedakah. And B would tell about the same thing. And so it says here, your wrongdoing. Your wrongdoing here is your iniquity. The translation is iniquity. Wrongdoing. You do offense to God, called translated as sin hata. Your wrongdoings is the avon by showing mercy. Now, this word showing mercy is actually hanan. Mercy is actually favor. This is an important word. It is favor, showing mercy or grace. And this is this word here, hanan. This is hanan. And it is translated as favor or grace. So the king has to show favor to the poor. Now, this word, literally speaking, is not the English word poor. This word here is the one who is depressed, someone who is afflicted and oppressed. I think that is a good way of explaining it. And so this is the oppressed. Oppressed, the one who is humbled, the one who is depressed. Yes, these will be the needy, the poor, the helpless, the helpless, the helpless mortal man. And so the advice to the king is very unexpected. I think you can say that it's unexpected because Daniel is trying to convince the king that God is punishing him because he has done an offense called Hatat sin. He has done his avon or wrongdoings, and he can fix this by doing charity. And what do you mean by doing charity, tzedakah? It means that you will show favor and treat the poor, the humble, the oppressed, the needy, the helpless well. Take care of them. And when you do that, that will be tzedakah or tzidkah in Aramaic or hanan in Aramaic as well. And this would be taking care of the oppressed, humble, needy, poor, helpless, and that would be show grace, show favor, take care of them, don't need to ask. And so that is tzedakah. Although it is commonly translated as righteousness, I think modern word charity actually fits a lot better. The reason being is it's about taking care of those people who can't take care of themselves. But Daniel is saying you can break away, wipe off, fix your sin and wrongdoing by doing charity, by taking care of those lives, those mortal mankind in your kingdom who have been oppressed, humble, needy, poor, and helpless. I think you would find this to be a very humbling statement to the king. But it is a very dangerous speech to the king because it's trying to advise the king to do what is right and do what is right before the Most High, before heaven, who owns the power over you. And so the idea of heaven is the authority over Nebuchadnezzar. And God in the heavens will be the one that will judge. This understanding that Nebuchadnezzar is going to be this animal is actually a warning to him because Nebuchadnezzar did not instantly turn into an animal. And so we now need to take a look at verse 28. Verse 28. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar is relating this in his letter, that is to all people, nation, and tongues in his kingdom. All, it says all, everything happened to Nebuchadnezzar the king. So until verse 27, he was writing about his dream, how he got the sages, tried to give him understanding. It didn't happen. Called Daniel, and Daniel was shocked about the interpretation. And finally, Daniel gave the interpretation and also added an advice to the king. We read in verse 29, it says, to the end of the 12 months. So it says here 12 months later. The word literally means at end of 12 months. This is literally what the Aramaic is saying. So it's not just 12 months later, it's at the end of 1 year. Now, I'm trying to just highlight to us that the entire dream that was communicated to him by God above and explained by Daniel to him, and that Daniel added in an advice to the king. And I believe that advice comes from God. This is how you fix the problem. That if you don't want to be the animal for 7 years, you need to fix your sin or your mistakes and your wrongdoings by doing charity, by showing favor to the oppressed, the humble, the needy, the poor, and the helpless. But for 12 months, he didn't. He was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. And verse 30, the king started to speak. Now, basically, it says that the king was trying to say something and he was looking at himself. He was saying, is this not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? So I just highlight these words, that I myself have built by my power for the honor of my majesty. Now, the problem he had for the 12 months is that he was all self absorbed. Now, this is a very interesting aspect. He had been told the meaning of the dream in chapter 2, and he acknowledged the God on high. He threw Daniel's three friends into the furnace of fire in chapter 3, and then they were rescued, and he really acknowledged the God of heaven. And now in chapter 4, he had a dream. It was a terrible dream. And Daniel had told him and gave him how to fix it. But he didn't attend to that. He still thinks that he is Babylon the Great, that Babylon is great because of Nebuchadnezzar. And God gave him time, 12 months, to repent, to do what is right by doing charity, helping the poor, the needy, and helpless, showing Hanan, grace and favor to all of them. And that would have solved all his problems. But we read now in verse 31, while the word was still in the king's mouth, as he was still speaking, then we hear this. A voice came from the skies. And it says this, King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared, it has been said. This idea here is really to tell him, God has already spoken. Why did you not listen? Now that you have spent 12 months ignoring God, then sovereignty has been removed from you. Now, the idea of sovereignty means his kingdom. The kingdom is removed from you. Now, what does that mean? It is not that he was killed. It is not that Babylon is no more. It is God telling Nebuchadnezzar, you are king now, but you will stop being king. When he becomes an animal, he cannot be king. His son has to take over. And so God says, your power of your kingdom has been removed. Now, this word remove is passed away, passed on. And this word passed on, we can say to his son. It was passed on from you, and it is to his son, Evil Merodach. Verse 32. And you will be cast away from mortal mankind, just as his dream had shown him. And that was a message from God. Your dwelling place, the place where you live, will be with the animals of the field. You will eat grass like the ox. 7 periods of time will pass over you until you recognize that the most high or the highest, Ila'ah, that's the name, the title, that Ila'ah will have something to say about it. He is the absolute ruler over mortal mankind. You are mortal, and above you is the Most High, Ila'ah. And he will decide what to do with your kingdom. And so this kingdom of yours is passed on to your son. The reason is because the time is not up for the kingdom of Babylon to end. It will have to be 70 years. And after that comes the chest and arms of silver. And so God is trying to teach Nebuchadnezzar a lesson. You might be the greatest of kings. And God says, I am the king over you. I am the king of kings. Immediately, the word concerning Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. Now, this word fulfilled is quite an interesting word. It literally means that the idea here was that the word came to fruition. I think that would be a good way. The word fulfilled is fruition. Because it was just the word or the matter in a dream, it is still not realized. The dream was given and 12 months had passed. And finally, the word came to an end. It is no longer a dream. It is no longer the word. It is no longer something to discuss. It is come to an end and it comes to pass. And so we read that he was cast away from humankind and began eating grass like an ox. And his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair had grown like eagle feathers and his nails like birds' claws. So this is this depiction of the imagery of Nebuchadnezzar. It is that kind of a picture. And this was really for 7 periods or 7 years. It could have been avoided had he turned away from his arrogance, from the thought that he is the great and mighty over everything. And so God is trying to teach him, above you, Nebuchadnezzar, is a greater God. Ila'ah, the Most High, the heavens, the Shemayim, is the one that is going to have the last say. He is the ruler of all mortal mankind. So very quickly, the text moves on because it's a letter written by Nebuchadnezzar. So it's to convey a message. It is not to convey the details of the situation. We have been told enough detail. First, the dream, then the interpretation of the dream, then how it happened according to the explanation of the dream. And so by the end of that period, and that would be 7 years. This is related by I, Nebuchadnezzar. He lifted his eyes. I raised my eyes toward heaven. This is Shemayim. That would be God above. And my reason returned to me. Now, this idea, my reason is my understanding. This word here is understanding. Now, it is a very interesting word because when he became an ox, like this one here, that he was an ox, he was not himself. He wasn't thinking himself. He was more thinking like an animal. He was behaving like an animal. And so it is important for us to realize that this word reason means that his faculties came back, came back. And this word came back, return is came back, was restored to him is also a good word. And I bless the Most High and praise and honored him who lives forever, for his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom from generation to generation. Now, these expressions is very Jewish, actually. We would read about this in the Torah, that God gives the Torah, and the Berit is forever and ever, is this word everlasting. Now, this word forever, or the word here is actually uh, alam. This is alam in Aramaic or olam in Hebrew. This word everlasting is also the same word, forever, everlasting, and is describing God. Now, how did he know God? They know of the Most High. It's just that he did not treat the Most High, Ila'ah, with dignity. And so he came back and he praised, honored Ila'ah, who lives for Olam or for Alam. His rule, his dominion is actually an Alam type of dominion. And his kingdom endures dar to dar or door to door, meaning generation to generation to generation. Never talks about when it's going to end. It doesn't talk because the Eastern people don't look at the end. The Eastern people looks towards. And so live alam is an alam dominion right here, means that it is generation to generation, that as long as people are around, God's kingdom will remain. His kingdom is an olam kingdom, meaning as long as people remain generation after generation. He exists for olam. For as long as there are people who acknowledge God in the land, he is above. Well, mortal man may die, but mortal man comes and goes. As long as they come and go, God is still acknowledging. That would be the idea that Nebuchadnezzar is expressing. We read in verse 35. Verse 35 says, all the inhabitants of the land are of no account. Means what? All the inhabitants, all those who dwell, all who dwell on the land, not the earth, but the land, the kingdom, are of no consideration. The idea is that none of them is worth anything to God if they think that they are great. The life of humans are very important to God. That's true. But when humans think that they are greater than God, God considers them as nothing. And it gives us a contrast that mankind or mortal humankind cannot be compared to Ila'ah, the Most High. that he does according to what he desires. And the word desire, it means that he, according to what pleases him, what he pleases among the army of heaven. Now, the army of heaven is the host of heaven, the strength of heaven, and that would be the angels. Even with the angels, have to listen to God. Among all the dwellers of the land, no one can fend off his hand. No one can block his hand by hitting his hand. Or no one can say to him, "What have you done?" No one can blame God because God is above all. The rest of humankind is puny humans. It is not to say that mankind is useless. This passage is to teach Nebuchadnezzar a lesson that even the king cannot go against the Most High Ila'ah, cannot go against heaven, cannot go against the God of heaven. And until he realizes that he is but a mortal human, he is like all humans, regardless of him being on the throne, that when it comes to God, everyone is equal. They are mortal humans. They are humans with a mortal life. It is a very important life, nevertheless, made in the image of God, but no mortal man can reject God, can say bad about God, can block God, can blame God, and thinks that he can do anything he wants. He can't. And Nebuchadnezzar is shown to us as a lesson that even Nebuchadnezzar has to acknowledge that the God Most High, El Elyon, or Ila'ah, or Shemayim above, is over every power, every mortal mankind on earth, over the entire kingdom, and even the king is not an exception. With this, we have to come to a stop, and we shall continue next week.